Hey beautiful people, I'm Georgina Joel Russell. Welcome to the S Word. So as many of you probably know by now, I'm a quantum healing hypnosis technique practitioner, which basically means I'm lucky enough to spend my days taking people through their past lives, and often the past of their current life, in order to heal. So here on the S Word, we're going to be talking all things spiritual. And in today's episode, I'm going to be chatting to Dr. Alan Robinson. Dr. Robinson and I met last November when he came to me for a QHHT session, and we are still connected via social media, so I've got to witness his growth and his mastery of joy since we worked together. And Dr. Robinson's been kind enough to come onto the podcast today to really share his story, to share his struggles in life, to talk about the session, the things that we explored together and how his life has changed since that day. So if you are enjoying these podcasts, please do subscribe to my YouTube channel. Please feel free to leave a comment, like and share. Enjoy.
So yeah, I was quite a technical person. I ended up doing a PhD in a sciencey engineering type subject, and I worked in the aerospace industry then for about almost 30 years, and I found the last parts of that quite a struggle. I was working with people a lot, and later came to a realization that I'm autistic, and that was causing difficulties with the working with people in terms of the amount of energy that I needed to expend to put into those social interactions, and that was causing me to go off the rails a bit, really, and self-medicate with alcohol, which is why. Which is actually what led me to seek therapy.
Yeah. So how long ago was it since you got your diagnosis of the autism?
I got the diagnosis itself, I got in 2019, so that's 3 years ago. But there's quite a waiting list. I did it through the NHS, and it was a big burnout at the end of 2017 that led me to start asking some searching questions about myself and do some research. And it was at the end of 2017, beginning of 2018, that I realised that autism was a likely explanation.
Yeah. So when we connected and you made the choice to come and have a QHHT session, do you mind telling us what the reasons were? What were you looking to achieve from that session?
So the trigger for it, the kind of the outward and obvious trigger, was that I'd been, like I said, self-medicating with alcohol. I managed to be, I was privileged enough to be able to retire from work in 2021, but I was still struggling with the after effects of work stress, still self-medicating. And the one particular day in November, I had a binge drinking session that got out of hand. It caused some stress for my wife as well as me, and I thought, now that's stepped over a line now. It really has to stop. And I decided that the only way to do that was to give up alcohol. Making that decision was quite straightforward, and actually quite easy to do. But I wanted to get some therapy to make sure that it became a permanent thing. And also I wanted to give Lynn, my wife, a concrete sign that I was taking it seriously, and therefore I wanted to find some therapy to do that.
Yeah, it was a brave move, really brave move, because we can make these conscious decisions once if we've had you said, like a binge drinking session or something triggers us to think about our life, but actually, you know, moving ahead with the choice to then put something into place to support you is you know, that is the next step, and that is a brave move. So yeah, it's amazing. Had you had hypnosis therapy before you contacted me?
Yes. Oh gosh, I can't really remember the details. It was maybe 10 years before. I'd had some hypnosis around probably anxiety and depression, as I understood it at the time.
Yeah.
And a little bit of visualization type stuff, and which did help.
Yeah.
But not as deeply as the QHHT session, I don't think.
Yeah. So I want to talk a little bit later on about how life has changed for you since we met and did that session, because like I say, I'm a follower of yours on Instagram, so I get to witness on a regular basis this amazing new version of Alan, which just fills my heart. But I wanted to move on really to talking about the session itself. And anyone who's out there who's listening or watching who perhaps doesn't have an understanding of QHHT, I'll explain in a nutshell what that means very quickly, just so that the rest of this conversation makes some sense to you. QHHT is a technique which was created by the legendary 𝕸𝕃𝔸ℕ. And for all intents and purposes, it creates healing. I won't go into all of the ways in which that happens, because it is down to the individual as much as anything else. But these sessions are a day-long session. We do a huge amount of deep work within that day. And from that point, then changes are made into the individual's life. You know, they start to behave in a different way. They release all the things that are no longer serving them. So QHHT is also known as past life regression. But I listened back to your session recording this morning, because obviously all of the hypnosis is always recorded and then passed on to the client afterwards. And what I have really forgotten about in your session is that we didn't explore any past lives as such, did we?
No.
What did we explore?
Well, before we get onto the session itself, one thing I thought I'd mention is that, and this is for the benefit as well of people who might be watching this and being a bit dubious about the, if you like, the theoretical background or the belief system that goes behind this. As an engineer and scientist, I'm really skeptical and logical, but I've always been aware of, you know, sometimes you don't need to understand something fully for it to work. And I had a big example of that was when I was at work. I was lucky enough to be sent on a training course to learn about neuro-linguistic programming. And as I learned about that, I thought, oh gosh, you know, that the scientific basis of this is a bit dodgy and a bit dubious, but it worked. You know, that was a bit of an eye-opener for me. And to be fair, when I first connected with you, Georgina, I didn't really know what QHHT was. But when you described the process to me, I was kind of hooked, because I thought, wow, you know, that the process, which I guess we're talking about in a minute, of getting everything done in a day, and also spending the whole day doing it, just that was so unique in terms of therapeutic approaches that I'd come across, and it felt so much better than the idea of, you know, one step at a time, doing a weekly session with CBT or something, which has its place. But yeah, I was very excited to be coming along to meet you on that day.
Yeah, we had an amazing day, didn't we? So I'm just wondering whether that experience that you had with the NLP, I mean, we know that the universe works in very strange ways, but it always works in ways which are for our better good, for the good of us. And what's come up for me while you're talking is I'm wondering whether that step, doing the NLP, was something which opened your mind in a different way.
Yeah.
Which then meant that your mind was open to something such as QHHT.
Yeah. Yeah. And yeah, I'm always up for trying things like that. I've always, you know, I taught myself to read tarot cards when I was in my 20s, and I also had a bit of a dabble with things like astral projection, because so whether it's always been there to an extent, my openness to things that I don't understand, but I suppose, thinking back, that when I was young, I had a logical side and this side drawn towards mystery and mythology and that kind of thing. And then the NLP bit was talking about parts and parts integration. And then I'm aware of this kind of growth journey that I've been going on, which is about integrating and about becoming whole. And maybe there's a story around that somewhere.
Yeah, absolutely. And I love that you've just brought that up, about, the idea around there being alternative aspects to us, parts of our character which we choose to deny and hide, because on our life journey to date, perhaps we have been told at some point that a characteristic of ours is not acceptable, that it's not good. And, that then creates this fragmented version of us, which Teal Swan talks about a lot. And it's just lovely that you've brought that up, because that's something that I've been exploring a lot recently. And, being able to come back to putting ourselves together, if you like, which for me equates to healing. It's like having a broken bone. What do you do with the bone? You bring it back together, and that is healing. So do you feel like that's what's happened to you?
It definitely feels like that, yes. I can't remember, what was I going to say about that. I think I was going to talk about the life stages and getting older, and feeling now much less judgmental of other people, more relaxed about being myself, and feel. When I first encountered social media, which as an autistic person, I found, as well as being full of horrible interactions and potential danger, also was a bit of a godsend, because I don't have many in real life friendships, but I found, that they talk about your vibe attracts your tribe and all that kind of stuff, and I found lots of online friends, but I always I went through a massive struggle about, gosh, I want to be authentic, and I want to present myself as all of me. But that means being vulnerable, and it means taking risks, and it means risking rejection and ridicule and censure from other people. And I can definitely feel that now I'm much more open about all of me than I was, and I feel much more integrated.
Yeah, it's amazing. It's amazing to hear. And you mentioned at the beginning there about age. Do you feel like age has played a part in you being able to be the authentic version of you, or is it something in addition to that?
Gosh, I guess yes and no. I don't really fully know what's allowed me to be myself. There's a sense of, and a lot of this triggered from the autism diagnosis and the burnout 5 years ago, which was like an earthquake in my personality, which forced me to reassess who I am. I feel now, right, I've given the first part of my life to academic success and to my career and to doing my best to do whatever kind of job I did as a parent, bringing up my children. And now it's my turn.
Yeah.
So that kind of movement through time and growing older plays that kind of part, if that makes any sense.
Yeah, it does. It makes complete sense. And it feels as though you have now you've given yourself permission to spend that time on yourself. You've given yourself the space to be able to spend time considering who Dr. Alan Robinson really is and how he wants to present himself to the world as well. So it's that makes complete sense. I wanted to talk a little bit more about, we understand your reasons for coming to the session. As always, people find me when they're at a pivotal moment when changes are necessary, which it felt like it had gotten to. That's the place that you'd gotten to, where the changes really were necessary, not only for you, but like you said, for your lovely wife as well. So when you came to the session, what did you really want your transformation to be? Who did you want to manifest? What version of you? What did the future you look like from where you were sitting?
That's an interesting question. So I knew that, like you say, there's always a trigger, but having made contact, and I don't know when I realised this, it was either very quickly after we made contact. It couldn't have been before. But I knew that day was going to be about so much more than fixing that outward problem that I mentioned with alcohol. And I was really excited by it because it was a chance to explore all of me. And I particularly liked that first part of the process where, we spent the whole morning talking about my whole life. And that was really exciting and really appealing.
Yeah.
And so what did I expect out of it? I don't know. I think I came with a really open mind, and I wanted to come out of it as a person who didn't drink alcohol. And I wanted to be, I don't know, more calm and more centered and more whole. That's the best way I can describe it.
Yeah, that's perfect. Perfect. So do you mind telling us a little bit more about the hypnosis part of the session, really, because I feel as though that's the part that most people are interested in. Being able to understand what the experience is like. And obviously, as we would have spoken about in the session, I have absolutely no way of knowing what somebody is going to experience when they're actually when they're in the hypnosis phase. The same way as I really don't know what or how, I don't know what that transformation is going to look like for that person when they leave. I just know that everything they need is what will happen. for you, when you went under, I remember that for anyone listening, when I drop the person into their first scene that they're going to be in, Alan dropped into a scene where you were in a playground, didn't you?
Yeah, yeah, yeah. So that afternoon experience was, it's like the most wonderful hypnosis experience I've ever had. I have had hypnosis in the past, and it was immediately different because I've never been tucked up into bed before to have a hypnosis experience, and that made it really quite special to start with, and so comfy, and I felt, really I was being cared for quite lovingly, I guess. That was really nice touch. So we had the induction of hypnosis, which was oddly familiar. I must have had that script before, but that's by the by, I guess. But anyway, so we dropped into the playground at my primary school, and I mean, the context around primary school for me that's when I started to get bullied at school. I don't remember much about whether that played a part in what I experienced in the hypnosis. I remember things about being in the playground and looking at the school building, and the school building changing from one building to another, something about a window. But the real big thing that happened then was, or it might have been that there was a kind of a change of scene where, you've listened to this recently, and I haven't listened to it back recently. I just looked at my notes, but didn't the end window of the school changed into a throne or something?
That's right. Yeah.
Yeah, and sat in this throne was this old man, who, and I'm kind of getting goosebumps talking about it now, just somehow exuded confidence and completeness and wholeness and love. And at one point, and this person didn't move. They were just sat still in this throne. But despite the fact that they didn't move, and despite the fact that in this vision they were, I don't know, 50 meters away from me, he reached out and put a hand on my shoulder. And I remember that made me cry. In the session. That was such a powerful emotional moment. And then it wasn't straight away. We talked about the appearance of that person. Something else happened, and then you asked me, well, does this person have a name? And I said, oh, I don't know. And then you said, why don't you ask him? And I asked him his name, and it took a little bit of a while, and I thought, I can't really, he's not really saying anything. But then it was like, well, hang on a minute. No, his name begins with M, and it's an ancient name. I can't quite, I don't know, it's not like Mike or something modern. And then the name Methuselah came to me. And at the time in the hypnosis, it didn't really mean anything to me in terms of any historical significance. Now I know that, the subconscious can be weird, and maybe I read about this years ago and it did mean something to me. But if you'd asked me before that session, who's Methuselah, I would have had no idea. But his turning up in that session was just magical and transformative.
Yeah. And this morning, like you said, I listened back to the session because I don't remember people's sessions after I've worked with them. And I listened back to yours, and I wrote down here that he was powerful, friendly, kind, and loving. And you also described him to be a successful realization of a man.
Yes. Yeah.
Which I thought was like, wow. And it, you know, at the time, I remember sitting next to you and listening, and I had a sense that this was almost, you know, a version of yourself that you needed to bring that aspect of,
Mm,
like we've just spoken about,
yeah,
bring that
yeah,
aspect of you in to who you are today.
yeah.
Um, and I remember how powerful him coming into that scene was.
Mm, yeah.
For anyone listening or watching, can you describe what it's like to have this visual experience while there is also awareness?
I could talk for hours about this kind of thing, because I've done an awful lot of reflecting and research about how my brain works, and also, so I want to talk about manhood, this successful realization of a man. So I need to make sure we talk about that in a few moments. But in terms of visualization, I consider that I'm one of those people who finds it difficult to visualize things in my mind's eye. And I remember when I was at university, I went on a little spiritual away day thing. At that time, I was a Christian believer, and at university we joined the Christian societies and whatever. And I went on this retreat, and they asked me to visualize my. I think the story was, imagine that Jesus has made a sculpture of you, and then we had to visualize the sculpture and describe how we reacted to it. I really struggled, but I couldn't visualize this sculpture, and that was my first experience of what I still with me today. In when I try and visualize, is that I can see little bits of things. Like if it was a sculpture of a person, I could maybe see an eyeball or a nose or a mouth, but they kind of fragment and float around, and they don't stay organized as they should.
Mm.
So I find it really difficult to visualize a whole sculpture along with its details, and I find it difficult to see it in color and in a kind of in a stable situation that I could maybe walk around it or whatever. But during the hypnosis, I was really kind of surprised by how symbols and characters like Methuselah arrived without me kind of feeling that I'd created them deliberately or contrived or conspired in making something spooky happen. You know, it was, these things came along of their own, with under their own steam, with their own energy, and then I saw them, and I don't think the visual quality of the experience was much different to the way it is when I try and visualize things normally, but certainly the way that things arrived was very interesting.
Yeah, because what I was struck by when I was listening to your session was how you were able to articulate very clearly what you were experiencing, and there was a lot of detail. And you know, it's always difficult for me when I'm speaking with people that have never had the experience to try and describe to them what it's like when you're having this visual experience, but you're, you know, in a relaxed state. And I always use the explanation of it's like dreaming while you're awake. Does that sum that experience up for you at all?
A little bit, yeah. I mean, my dreams tend to be. I have on occasion had lucid dreams where I've been able to direct the action and influence it a little bit, but not a lot of times. How was it? It was very relaxed. It wasn't at all frightening. It was. I was aware that I was relaxed. I was aware that on occasion I seemed to lift out of the hypnosis a little bit, as I was trying to explain what was happening. Maybe that was when my conscious mind was trying to puzzle a little bit too hard about what was happening and try and analyze it. Yeah. But yeah, it was a very relaxed and kind of loving experience, but also these things were happening on their own volition.
Yeah, exactly like you say, the journey is happening and then you start to be part of it. From memory, what do you feel as you reflect back on that scene that we were talking about in the school? And we know that working with the subconscious, they will bring up whatever it is that somebody needs to see in order to release emotional attachment to perhaps that part of their life. On reflection, why do you think that school scene was shown to you?
Oh, why? I guess, the things that I've struggled with in life have been about relationships with other people and communicating with other people. And primary school was really the beginnings of experiencing that in real life. That was when I say I became aware that I had very few friends, maybe just one friend at school, and I used to get bullied, and I found playtimes frightening. I much preferred lesson time. And maybe that's why that was the beginning of that realization.
Yes, yeah. Well, it makes complete sense, doesn't it? It feels as though it was a memory that was it was a memory of a time in your life when you were creating belief systems around yourself as much as anything else.
Yeah.
Which then obviously play a part in who we are as adults. So going back to that particular scene, those memories were important for you to understand where a lot of your beliefs had rooted themselves, where they'd initially begun. So yeah. And then when we moved on from the school scenes, which we spent some time exploring, then from memory, I sense that we went on to directly work with the subconscious. What was your memory around what happened after those school scenes?
I can't remember what happened first, but I remember a scene in a library.
Yeah.
And I remember a scene. Well, it wasn't particularly a scene. It was like just an inner world where symbols came to me, and we talked about the meaning of symbols.
Yeah, and I do remember that your session, out of all of the sessions that I've done, seemed to have more symbols attached to it than any other session that I've ever carried out.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. And I was wondering, whether you do consider the visual side of like having a symbol in your life coming from like a scientific perspective. Is there something that you've been drawn to around having a symbol, a shape? I just was interested to know why in particular there was so many symbols in your session.
Yeah, I'm really surprised to hear that, actually, because from what I've just said about the way that I struggle to visualize things, that I assumed that I was going to have had maybe one of the least rich, symbol rich or scene rich experiences out of all of your clients. So I thought other people would have so many more wild and wonderful journeys. So to hear that mine was rich with symbols is quite amazing.
Yeah.
But I don't. Why would they? Why? So from my background and from science, I'm having to think on the spot now, and I can't really. The only thing I can connect with is that from a mathematical point of view, and my love of logic and maths and science, geometry and shapes maybe play a part. Colours, and to some extent, those symbols played out in a scene where I felt that I was in deep space somewhere.
Yeah.
And space has always been a bit of a passion of mine. But I can't really. I don't know. I can't say much more than that.
Do you remember what the symbols were that came up for you?
So one was very geometric. It was a triangle, and it had some beauty to it. It had a triangular bit of polished mineral, with a very lustrous, shiny surface, and a deep blue inside.
Yeah.
I can't think what gem that would be, but like a deep blue mineral, and it also kind of in a weird kind of holographic way had an eye, a human eye, or the eye of an animal inside it that was looking out.
Yeah, yeah, I remember. And we did, like you said, we talked about those symbols within the session, and without me accessing too much of the left-hand side of your brain, which obviously I don't want to do when I've got you under, we did talk about what perhaps these symbols meant to you, which was, it's very interesting. And what I've learned, when I'm working with clients in this way, is that the subconscious will bring up whatever you need to see in order to understand something. And whether that be symbols, I have a lot of clients who will move into spaces where they see animations of things. So they'll see cartoon characters. And I do remember that there was a character which turned up in your session. Do you remember what that was?
In that scene with the symbols?
I think it might have been later on in the session. And there was in particular a character that came forwards.
Oh, gosh. No, that's not ringing any bells at the moment.
Okay. It was a robot type figure.
Oh, yes. Yeah.
And I remember you saying in the session that you were actually called Robot when you were at school, and it wasn't something you particularly liked.
No, it was a horrible nickname that I was given. Yeah.
And I remember that symbol coming up. And again, it's interesting, isn't it? And I'm wondering whether that symbol coming up was, again, something for you to be able to look at with a loving feeling around that. And again, it feels to me as though that was almost another aspect of you there, that robot figure.
Yeah. And I do remember now there was something about evolution of me around that figure.
Yeah.
And it was associated with this chain that appeared. There was a really strong metal chain that had a really shiny surface, which started close by and then disappeared off into the distance through what looked like a almost like a portal that you'd see in a sci-fi movie in the far distance, and the underside of the chain was kind of like raw crystals, raw ore, and we're back to minerals again. And as I was talking about minerals a minute ago, I was remembering that when I was maybe 9 years old, and I lived in the Peak District in the UK at that time, and in the Peak District there are quite a few show caves that you can go in and have a look round. And I remember being taken round by my parents, and in the gift shop of one of them, I took home a little sample box of minerals, and in there was blue John, and there was some zinc ore, I think, and some other bits and pieces. And one of them I used to be quite fascinated by was, I think it must have been the blue John. It was rough, wasn't cut, wasn't polished, but it had a beautiful deep blue that you could stare into, and that, talking about it now, connects with that more refined, polished, triangular symbol, and the underside of the chain, which was less refined. And I remember we talked about the chain, and then you weren't putting these thoughts in my head. This was me talking about the chain representing an evolution in time, but always there was the possibility for refinement, because the underside was rough and the top of it was polished.
Yeah.
And then this robot, to go back to the question you asked, this robot figure appeared somewhere in the center of that chain, I think, or maybe towards the beginning. I can't remember what they were doing with it, but yeah, that's where they were.
Yeah, it seemed to crop up. And again, it was a symbolic figure. It was associated with something in your childhood which you didn't enjoy. And a lot of the work that we did earlier on was around the childhood and releasing those memories, so that version of you was no longer having an emotional effect on you. So I do remember that's what you said about the chain, that you talked about its potential and the refinement that exists at all times, which was amazing. So do you feel as though when you think back to that symbolized the possibility for future growth for you? What do you think it,
that's what it seemed to be about. And it was also, I remember feeling that the chain was very strong, and it was like something I could hold on to in times when I felt unsafe or unsure.
Yeah, it was stability, wasn't it? And what's interesting about what you've said there is, again, the figure, that man who came up, I do remember in part of the session that what you said to me is that this particular figure has told you to reach out to him in times when you feel that you're looking for stability. And again, that sort of connects those things together, that it feels to me as though those visuals were offered to you to provide you with a more solid foundation to move forwards with. Would that sound true to you?
Yeah, certainly. And you know, there is very strong symbolism there, the strength of the chain and the strength of that old man character.
Yeah. And I remember there was a lot of sensation around the feeling of what those things were bringing into your physical body at the time as well. It was almost as though, that was a part of the reprogramming. You were being given that feeling of a solid foundation through these visuals, which is interesting. Do you remember what happened after we kind of traveled through those experiences with the chains and the blue crystal tunnel?
I had to remind myself of that by looking at the notes that I made after the session, and I remember this chain in the far distance disappeared into this like sci-fi looking hole in the universe, if you like, and it was filled with a kind of a glowing light on the inside, and the walls were these kind of blue crystals, like little almost like the shape and texture of cobblestones, but not made out of grey stone, but instead like a almost the same stuff that the triangle thing was made out of, like polished mineral.
Yeah.
And almost a little bit like magnetite as well, that kind of feeling.
Yeah, that's right. I wrote that down here. I remember you using that term. And there were sounds as well.
I remember that it, like clickety clackety noises of the magnetite knocking together in the walls of this tunnel that the chain disappeared into.
And I remember you saying that there was watery type sounds as well. And whenever somebody's describing feelings, visuals and sounds, then as the practitioner, I am then, completely sure that they are in exactly the space that they're supposed to be in. All of the senses are being consumed by this experience as well. So it's always good for me to hear that person is having that full-on experience, because that full-on experience is what creates the healing. That powerful experience is what stays with somebody after the session. And I was just wondering, from kind of listening to you and considering you haven't listened back to your session for a while, I was wondering how that did stay with you after the day, these visuals, these sensations.
So I remember, this is kind of connecting together for me now, because I remember that part of the session was kind of towards the end.
Yeah.
And there was something around the walls of that hole in the universe kind of dissolved somehow and became a bubbly, frothy, like the sea, which for me represented unbound and unlimited joy. It was just potential and fun, and that, and this is nothing of this is what I came on the day for. Not, at least not consciously. But that has been a real thing I've struggled with in my life. Someone said to me, a good friend said to me a few years ago, we were talking about, I can't remember what we were talking about, but I used the word joy. And she said to me, "You don't really do joy, do you?" And I thought, do you know what? You're right. But it's not because I don't want to. I remember at some time around that time when when the walls dissolved into this sea, I remember again another powerfully emotional part of the session where I almost begged the subconscious people who are around to give me help in releasing the things that were stopping me experiencing and expressing joy. Because I desperately wanted to move on from someone who made a career out of logic and enjoyed being an analytic and scientific person, and still does, but also saw that as a constraint, something that stopped me experiencing joy, stopped me being free and just being in the moment and reveling in what life is.
Yeah, it's interesting. And when you did that reaching out in the session and almost, was just asking for that help, do you remember what came forwards for you, what was offered?
All I remember at the moment is that it was an emotional moment. I don't remember what came back.
Yeah. And again, that's what helps me to know, if you like, the effects that this session is going to have on somebody, the more emotions that show up, the more powerful the end result, you know. So and I do remember that your session was very emotional as well. And I remember 3 words in particular that you spoke about towards the end of the session, was that you said self-love, forgiveness and acceptance were what you were really feeling at that point.
Yeah, yeah.
And, you know, it's interesting, really, from my point of view, to see toward, you know, at the end of the session, when these are words that you are speaking yourself, you know, they're coming from subconscious, but these are words that you're bringing up. Whereas at the beginning of the session, what we were experiencing were those very traumatic early scenes as the little boy who was confused, who was looking for a potential mentor, if you like. And I wanted to just ask you about that, because I also remember from the session that that was a big part of coming to this place of self-love, forgiveness and acceptance, was the need for a mentor in your life. And I think that was something that you touched on a little bit earlier. Could you tell us about that?
Yeah. So there's quite a few threads running through that, I think. I just before I found out that I'm autistic, I formed a pretty strong conclusion that my dad is also autistic. And then that's when the penny dropped, because, oh my goodness, yeah, it can be hereditary, and therefore probably the pair of us are. And my dad is a very loving and gentle person, but was never really able to give me any life advice. He didn't have many strong and deep friendships. He got on well with people. He's gentle, and that's why he managed to do that. But he wasn't someone who was like a model of traditional masculine strength. And that was difficult for me. So yes, this Methuselah turned up as this representation of a perfected and completed man was a very interesting thing to turn up.
Yeah, absolutely. And do you feel that having that masculine energy available to you while you were in that kind of relaxed state was something that you've kind of been able to bring into your life as you've needed to since then?
Yes, because up until that point, I had really struggled with masculine energy, because what it meant for me just goes back to childhood and being bullied at school. And I was bullied by boys.
Yeah.
And that, you know, all through school, I was bullied by boys, and through early adult life, I was misunderstood most often by other men.
Yeah.
And when I went through my career, I was, because it was a technical career, and the gender balance in that industry, you know, it's getting okay now, but when I went through it, was still suffering from a male dominant bias. All of my difficult interactions were with men.
Yeah.
And it's been a real struggle for me. And so I've had to find out for myself what being a man means. yeah, that's so.
Mm. So is this another kind of aspect of you which you are exploring more now?
Yeah, yeah, and part of the joy that I experience in life now is as a result of that exploration.
Mm.
And up until starting this transformation, the result of all of those difficult interactions with other men had simply produced anger in me, and frustration, and a dislike of other men.
Mm.
That's how I put it. And it became quite strong and powerful, and in a negative sense, and meant that I really wanted to distance myself from other men, not only physically but emotionally, and in the way that I present myself. And I didn't really have answers to how to do that.
Yeah.
I was aware that I needed to let go of the anger because it was a negative thing, but I didn't know how to take it forward.
It's interesting, isn't it, that the thought processes seem to also change after a session like this, and we seem to be more able to take a look at the parts of ourselves which we haven't been able to look at before, almost as though some new a level of acceptance takes place during the session. And being able to look at the whole of us, which is what you've been doing a lot since we worked together, brings us back to that wholeness that we talked about at the beginning, doesn't it?
And even talking about it now is adding an extra level of sense to it. I've only just really articulated for the first time why I'm so angry with other men.
Yeah.
Because I was bullied and misunderstood by them for my whole life.
Of course.
And why it was so emotional to meet that Methuselah character, because he was the first masculine character that I'm getting goosebumps again talking about him, that I'd met who wasn't threatening.
Yeah.
He didn't need to be threatening because he was complete and whole. That's why he didn't speak. I remember thinking at the time, he didn't need to speak.
Yeah.
Didn't need to prove himself or demonstrate anything. He was simply whole, complete, evolved, refined, and perfection.
Yeah. Yeah. Absolutely. And all that existed, really, which is amazing. Yeah. And it's, you know, it's so interesting for me to listen to you speaking about the session now, because you know, at the time, I know that my clients, obviously, they have a level of awareness, but that awareness doesn't always, it's not always available to a point that they're going to be able to understand why information is coming up during the session. And obviously, you know, having spent those several hours before we move into hypnosis where we talk about you and I understand as much as I possibly can about who you are, I can be sitting next to you, and often I'm kind of like silently clapping next to my clients, because I understand and I can see the connection between why these things are being brought up when the person's under in connection with why they came to the session. And
Yeah.
I know that for my clients, when they're actually under, that's not available to them because they're just having this amazing experience. But like I said, I'm often sitting there next to the bed going, oh my God, I get this. I know why it's come on.
Yeah.
It makes complete sense. So when I listen to you talking, kind of like even now, structuring all of those puzzle pieces together, it's amazing. It's just so exciting to
It
listen
is,
to.
and it's amazing that I kind of I walked out of that session in a little bit of a daze. And what are we now? We're almost coming up for a year later. It must be about 9 months, and still the process is happening. It's that the effects of what was started on that day are still flowering.
Yeah. Oh, thank you so much for saying that. So that kind of brings us quite nicely round to the question that I wanted to ask, which is, what has changed in your life since we worked together in that QHHT session?
I think, and again, I'm only just joining the dots here to the fact that the session kind of ended with me asking for help in experiencing joy. And that is very much what's happening now. I'm kind of the happiest I've ever been, and I've also become much more self-confident and been able to set boundaries with people in a positive way, and I've let go of a lot of anger, and been able to be more fully me.
Yeah. So have you noticed any differences with how you feel about masculine energy around you?
Yeah, I mean, again, this is an evolving topic that I could talk for a long time about. And I'm quite passionate about it as well. What I've realized is that for my whole life I struggled with being around other men, and it resulted in a kind of an anger that I couldn't quite understand. And now I feel, I mean, we could talk about the way that autistic people experience gender, and talk about words like autigender and non-binary and whatever, but they're a bit loaded with ideas that I suspect might turn off a lot of people, because unless you've opened your mind up to what gender might be, it can be quite, you're inviting being dismissed and labelled weirdo, and that's the end of that conversation. But what I can say is that I've felt freed from the demands and the constraints that we currently, in this era of history and in this location in a Western country, associate with what men must do and cannot do. And I now think, I've had enough of that.
Yeah.
I've absolutely had enough of it. And I'm in a place now where, this is, as I say, it's evolving more and more quickly, but in a less dramatic and less scary way for me, at least, although it's creating a few ripples for people around me. Is that I'm just me.
Yeah.
And I create a little bit of psychological distance away from the idea of manhood. That doesn't move me further towards womanhood. Um, it's just a sense of I can be who I am.
Yeah.
It doesn't necessarily need labels. Labels are helpful. The label autism was massively helpful for me because it comes with a huge association with things that autistic people tend to experience, tend to find challenging, and tend to benefit from. That's really helpful. But the other labels associated, say, with gender, some people find really helpful, some don't. It's a turn off for some. And I'm enjoying reading about all of that, taking from it what I find helpful and ignoring the rest.
Yeah, yeah, amazing. And I'm wondering whether, you know, the last few words that we spoke about when you were actually under, and we were kind of, I was aware that I was working with subconscious, although I was speaking as though it was you, which was useful for you in particular. And those words around self-love, forgiveness, and acceptance were the last things that we kind of like really touched upon before I brought you out. And I'm wondering whether bringing those into your consciousness is then what has given you the permission, like we talked about before, but also some form of motivation to then go on and kind of research and find ways for you to move forwards with the self-love in place, with the forgiveness in place, with the acceptance in place. And it feels as though, you know, that was predominantly, aside from releasing the childhood stuff, that is what the session brought to you. Would you agree?
Yeah, and I'd forgotten that those were the last few words towards the end of the session, and it's very much what's been happening over the last couple of months for me.
Yeah.
And I do feel quite passionate about it now, and I want to say to any men who might be listening, and also anyone who's listening like me with a kind of a skeptical engineer scientist kind of head on, is that you're allowed to enjoy other stuff. You're allowed to be a whole person. You're allowed to be not defined by the constraints that you think you've had imposed on you. You can move beyond that.
Yeah. And
men are allowed to have fun. And scientific men are allowed to have fun.
And it's, oh my god, it's so lovely to hear you say that, because obviously, you know, when we started our session and we sat down and we talked, you said the whole opposite. It was about, you know, I don't know how to have fun, and listening to you saying that, like you said, 9 months on, I'm like, wow, that's what this work is all about. You know, and we may not have any idea of what we're going to see, experience, feel when we start this process. During the process, you know, for sure, we don't really know what's going to turn up, and we never quite know what's going to be the end result. But what I do always see on a regular basis is that it feels as though we've sort of go in a complete circle, like we've just talked about now, that, you know, it is when somebody brings something to the session that they want to change, we go on this great big journey, and then the change takes place. And for me to be able to witness that in you is just, oh, it fills my heart. It really does.
The other thing that has come to me is that talking about kind of joining back to the beginning of the session. The trigger that brought me there was a misadventure with alcohol and a desire to ensure that I didn't have another one. And it's 9 months now, and I have not had any difficulty with alcohol since then. I didn't drink any alcohol until a few weeks ago, when and it wasn't through a kind of a process of self-denial. It wasn't like, oh gosh, I'd love some alcohol, but I must resist one day at a time, that kind of thing. It was an absence of a desire for alcohol.
Yeah.
And I can't remember why, but Lynn and I have been drinking non-alcoholic gin, and we said how lovely it is, and we kind of experienced that because it'd been so long since we had any alcohol, we couldn't. We said, you know what, I think this tastes nicer than real gin. But we got talking. We said, well, why don't we try some real gin again? Just summer, you know, and we could have a G&T. And because of how I feel about alcohol now, I felt brave enough to try, and we did. And so I tried the gin, and I will admit, on one of the nights when we had the bottle of gin open, I drank too much. Yeah. Okay, and I woke up the day after thinking, you know, I look back at that, I didn't enjoy that. And between us, we finished the bottle off, and then forgot about it. And I think a couple of weeks went by, and I said to Lynn, I fancy trying some wine. And got a bottle of wine, and I had half a glass of wine, and I noticed the alcoholic effect. And another glass, and I thought, yeah, it's the same experience again. I'm not enjoying this. And I ended up pouring the last glass in the bottle away, and I feel absolutely joyful about it now because I don't want it.
Yeah,
I don't need it because life is good enough, and I don't need to self-medicate.
Yeah, yeah. How amazing is that? It's just that, again, is just incredible to hear. And I was speaking to a client this morning, and I was trying to describe what it's like, the after effects of a session like this, when you are looking to give something up. And when you said it was like an absence of that desire. And that's exactly what it felt like for me, you know, for the things that I've been able to release since having these sessions myself. And that's so well put, that it does feel as though it's just an absence of desire. It's almost as though the desire for that thing that wasn't serving you, that wasn't benefiting you anymore, but had become a behavioral pattern, a habit, because we were looking for escape from by using it. It's almost as though the desire gets erased, but without any nasty effects.
Yeah.
As well.
Yeah, no drama.
Yeah, no drama. Yeah. Exactly, no drama.
Yeah.
And, you know, I see a lot of people who are addicts, and they have a very similar experience. And it doesn't necessarily mean that when we're working together and you're in the hypnosis phase, that we're even going to touch on the alcohol as a subject matter, because we didn't, did we? No.
And that's why I wanted to mention it now, because it almost seems like it was, you know, that's what brought me there, but it was almost like a side story. And yet that was fixed as well as the other stuff that was going on.
Yeah, exactly. And that is exactly it, because, you know, people come to see me for specific reasons, but obviously quite often the reason that they're coming to me isn't the reason that they're coming to me. You know, it's like you've so lovely, so well put it, that it's like an offshoot, you know. And what we needed to work on in your session was the self-love, the forgiveness, and the acceptance, and then all of the other stuff just falls by the wayside, doesn't it? And then what comes in is the joy, which is the end result of moving into that part of you that wasn't missing, it was just hiding for that period of time. So
it's almost like when I've got a kind of a vision of this, but I can't quite put it into words, which is once you allow your desires to and needs to be met by the things that you want out of life that you thought you weren't allowed to have. Then the anger subsides and the need for the things that you were self-medicating with just disappears.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, like we would have spoken about in the session, the anger is fear. That's baseline what that emotion is. It's fear. It's fear around, can I really bring to the world the whole version of me? It's fear around what if I actually do that? But within your session, what you experienced was the support that's available to you in this masculine energy that you can bring into your life as and when needed, which was the figure that we saw, the acceptance around that, and that actually fulfilling a need in you. And then when that need was fulfilled and you felt supported and there was more of a balance around the masculine and energy that you hold yourself, then there is no fear around walking out into the world and being completely yourself, because you don't find the fear in you anymore, because it has been replaced, like we said, with self-love, forgiveness and acceptance. And then that in itself means that we don't need to reach out for alcohol on that level that we were before. So that's another thing that I guess is important for people to understand, that what you may be experiencing right now, if you are out there and experiencing some form of struggle, the struggle you're experiencing will not necessarily be what we have to work in the session for you to release that struggle. It's not A to B as such. But working with the subconscious like we do, we don't need to take control of that because they do. So, yeah. I suppose my final question is, I wanted to ask, what advice or what words of encouragement would you use for anyone out there who is struggling, whether that be a physical struggle, whether that be an emotional struggle, whether that be an addiction, and they are finding themselves in that place where they're just not feeling good? What would you say to them about reaching out to something like QHHT, an alternative?
I mean, what I've learned about addiction from my own journey with it is that it doesn't matter what the addiction is. And almost it's like, if you focus on trying to not do an addictive thing, you're almost doomed to failure, because that's what you're focusing on. And the key to it is understanding what's out of alignment in your mind or in your life that's causing you to seek refuge in that addiction. And where do my thoughts go then? It's about, being brave enough to try to think yourself. There are several routes, I suppose, is what I think. There are several routes to finding that cause, and the difficulty is that there's an old comedy sketch about trying to find a black cat in the dark whilst you're blindfolded. And the problem is that the addiction, whatever you're using to self-medicate, meets the need that is being unmet, and therefore you don't know what that need is, because it's being met. So you kind of have to put the addiction aside for a little while if you can. Try and use denial and strength to park it and see what comes up. You might get a sense, you might get some insight into what the driver towards addiction is, analytically in that moment. But also you probably might benefit from some help using something alternative. And I think I've formed the view that the traditional approaches to addiction recovery tend not to work too well, because they are a little bit about denial and one day at a time. And, you know, yeah, it's not, denial doesn't work. You have to get to the bottom of it. And certainly my experience with QHHT did so much more than help me with my goals around not repeating those addictive behaviors.
Yeah.
So yeah, be brave and try it. You know, you haven't got a lot to lose by giving it a go.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you. Is there anything else that you would like to talk about that we haven't shared already, or anything that haven't asked you that you would like to say?
The only thing oh gosh, my thoughts are disappearing. No, I'm having a blank moment now.
Absolutely fine. I threw that one in at the end.
Yeah,
there, didn't I?
there was something I wanted to say, but I can't think what it was. Maybe I'll message you afterwards, and you can add it in.
No worries, no worries. Well, it has been an absolute pleasure to not only see you looking incredible as usual, but just to, you know, have this opportunity to talk about the session and really how things have changed for you since. So thank you so much. Thank you for your time today, Alan. It's been amazing. And it was just an honor to carry out that session with you. And the fact that you had concerns around whether what you'd experienced was as powerful as some, I can assure you that that experience you had that day was equally as powerful, and the symbolic side of it again is nothing like I've seen before. So unique and incredible, just like you.
I tell you what, there was a thought that was hovering my mind that I share, which was that I've been in some pretty dark places, like years ago, 5 or 6 years ago, and even when I've not been in the darkest of places, I've often found that getting some rest, going to bed, has given me an escape from problems. But now, what I find is that I often view going to bed to go to sleep as an interruption. An unwelcome interruption to being joyful about life.
Yeah.
And I can't wait to get up the following day and do it all again.
Wow. How amazing is that? And how different, you know, how different from that person that I met back in November 2021. So, and you know, this is also a testament to you, to the amount of personal time and energy that you have chosen to, you know, you have made these choices to do the research, to look at yourself, to do the inner growth stuff, which is what is part of this work. You know, this session itself is, for a lot of people, it's the beginning of an ongoing journey of self-discovery. It really is. And those like you who spend the time doing that self-discovery stuff, who research, who read, you are the ones that benefit the most. So this is just, you know, I applaud you for having done all of that work as well, because it's paid off. Look at you.
Yeah. It certainly has.
Well, thank you again. It's been an absolute joy. And I everyone that's listening, I hope that you found value in what we had to offer today. And obviously, as I said at the beginning, if there are any comments or any questions, please put them in the comments box below, and either Alan or myself will answer them. So thank you.
Yeah, excellent. It's been awesome.